When it comes to unbelievable stories, this one cannot be ignored. Events like these deserve to be known worldwide. This case took place in Italy in 1939. Leonarda Cianciulli, a soap merchant from Correggio, offered her fragrant goods to the townspeople while also treating them to homemade biscuits. However, the ingredients in these products were rather peculiar, though this would only come to light much later. Leonarda Cianciulli was born on November 14, 1893, in the small town of Montella, in the Italian province of Avellino. From an early age, she suffered from a lack of maternal love. Her mother, Emilia, genuinely did not love her, as the girl was the result of an assault. Because of this, Emilia often mistreated and even beat her daughter. Every time she looked at Leonarda, she was reminded of the reason she had been forced to marry a man she did not love. At a very young age, Leonarda attempted suicide twice, unable to endure the abuse and beatings, which had become unbearable for her. In 1914, after meeting a young man named Raphael Pansardi, a postal worker, Leonarda decided to marry him. More than anything, she wanted to leave her parents' home, so she did not hesitate for a second. However, her parents were against the marriage, as they had planned for her to wed her cousin. After the wedding, Leonarda's mother was so enraged that she cursed her for the rest of her life. Leonarda pretended not to care and settled with her husband in the small town of Loria. It seemed that the couple's life was going well, but just a few years into their marriage, Raphael started drinking heavily. Desperate for money, Leonarda resorted to fraud, which eventually led to her imprisonment. Even years later, their situation did not improve. In 1930, a powerful earthquake, measuring 6.7 on the Richter scale, struck the Italian region, causing significant loss of life and widespread destruction. Leonarda's home was also damaged, and with nowhere to live, the family moved back to Correggio. Leonarda had a strange obsession with motherhood. Perhaps due to childhood trauma, she experienced 17 pregnancies, yet 13 of her children did not survive. 10 of them died within the first few months of life, and the remaining 3 she was unable to carry to term. As a result, only 4 of her children survived, and she became excessively protective of them, believing she had to shield them from her mother's curse. A fortune teller she once visited predicted that she saw prison in her right hand and a psychiatric hospital in her left. Leonarda later recounted that every night she had dreams of small white coffins, one after another, being swallowed by the earth. Unable to bear the thought of losing another child, she started reading books on palmistry, astrology, spells, curses, and spiritualism. Meanwhile, her husband's drinking problem worsened, and the family had nothing to live on. The couple constantly fought, and eventually they decided to divorce. After severing ties with Raphael, Leonarda moved with her 4 children to the 3rd floor of a building on Vecchio Avenue. Despite the ominous predictions from her mother, she managed to turn her life around and opened a small shop. It seemed that fortune was finally on her side. She successfully sold secondhand clothing and soap, and even performed tarot readings, having been fascinated by the occult and black magic since childhood. Her warm and helpful nature earned her great respect in the community. Her family appeared completely normal. Her 4 children behaved well in school and had many friends. Despite her divorce, Leonarda never forbade her ex-husband from seeing their children. She also enjoyed inviting her neighbors over for tea and dessert. Everything changed drastically when one of Leonarda's sons, Giuseppe, her favorite, decided to enlist in the Italian army during World War II. From that moment on, she was consumed with worry. His departure filled her with an overwhelming sense of despair and fear. Her superstitious nature convinced her that she needed to take matters into her own hands and turn to the occult for help. Thus, Leonarda devised a sinister and horrifying plan, one that involved human sacrifices to protect her son from harm. To bring her dark ideas to life, Leonarda used tarot cards. This was the perfect way to attract her victims. At some point, she realized she didn't even need to seek out or lure new victims. They were already coming to her. 3 of her friends frequently visited her home. All 3 were lonely older women who sought comfort and advice from the kind and sympathetic Leonarda. Among these friends were Francesca Clementina Soavi, an unmarried woman who worked as a nanny for the neighborhood children; Virginia Cacioppo, a former opera singer who had traveled the world and earned a respectable reputation; and Ermelinda Faustina Setti, a semi-literate countrywoman with a submissive yet foolish nature. The three of them often gathered in Leonarda's home, spending their evenings chatting away. The fear of losing her son forced Leonarda to act immediately. She made a decision and promised herself to carry it out before it was too late, before she would never see her beloved son again. Her first victim was Ermelinda Faustina Seti, who fell at Leonarda's hands on December 17, 1939. In their final conversations, Leonarda foretold a bright future for her friend, predicting that she would soon get married. One day, Ermelinda visited Leonarda's house again, and from that moment on, no one ever saw her again. The day before, Ermelinda had even asked a neighbor if she could take care of her cats for a few days, as she was planning to leave town. The tarot cards laid out by Leonarda promised the woman a meeting with the love of her life. That morning, December 17th, Ermelinda spent hours getting ready. She styled her hair elaborately, applied makeup, and sprayed perfume all over her body. She appeared excited and, unable to contain herself, confessed to some acquaintances that she was getting married and moving to a city in southern Italy. The last time the people of Correggio saw her was when she stepped into Leonarda's house. From that moment on, she disappeared. However, her vanishing did not raise any suspicions, as everyone assumed she had left to start her new life, stopping by Leonarda's home only to say goodbye. In reality, everything was far more sinister. Leonarda convinced Ermelinda that she would meet her future husband in the town of Pola, telling her that the man was a close friend of hers who had been longing to meet Ermelinda. Seizing the moment, Leonarda suggested that her friend leave her belongings in her care while she was away, and even made her sign a notarized letter declaring Leonarda as the manager of her savings. She also advised Ermelinda not to tell anyone about her upcoming marriage to avoid gossip and misfortune. However, Leonarda encouraged her to write letters to friends in advance so that once she had left, Leonarda could send them out, ensuring that Ermelinda's acquaintances would hear from her and not suspect anything. Lastly, Leonarda asked her to stop by one last time the evening before she departed. When Ermelinda arrived at Leonarda's house, her hostess greeted her with warmth, appearing cheerful and well-dressed. She offered Ermelinda a glass of wine, in which she had secretly dissolved a powerful sedative. As soon as the drug took effect and Ermelinda lost consciousness, Leonarda dragged her into a small room, took an axe, and hacked her body into 9 pieces. She then placed the remains into 2 large basins she had prepared beforehand. Filling a newly purchased cauldron with water, she placed it over a fire and added 7 kilograms of caustic soda along with the dismembered body parts. Leonarda stirred the mixture until Ermelinda's flesh dissolved into a dark, viscous substance. She then poured the liquid into buckets and left it to settle. Observing the results, Leonarda mused aloud, "This should be enough soap for 6 months." As for the victim's blood, she allowed it to coagulate before placing it in the oven to dry. Once it had hardened, she ground it into a fine powder and mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs. After carefully kneading the ingredients together, she baked crispy cookies, which she later served to her unsuspecting guests, ate herself, and even shared with her children. Ermelinda's disappearance went unnoticed. The neighbors remembered that she had spoken about moving to Pola, and since she was unmarried and had no close relatives nearby, no one searched for her or suspected foul play. Everything remained quiet, but 9 months later, on September 5th, 1940, Leonarda decided to repeat her ritual. This time, her victim was Francesca Clementina Soavi. Shortly before the murder, Leonarda had foretold Francesca's future, telling her that she would soon leave Correggio to accept a position as the director of a boarding school in Piacenza. Leonarda claimed that a school principal she knew was willing to hire Francesca as his replacement. Just as before, Leonarda urged her friend to keep the news to herself to avoid tempting fate. Instead, she advised Francesca to send postcards to her family, explaining that she was leaving town due to her new job opportunity. Once again, Leonarda convinced her victim to appoint her as the manager of her finances and property, should the need arise. Everything proceeded according to plan. On the eve of her supposed departure, Francesca visited Leonarda's house to say goodbye. She was offered wine laced with a sedative, and after she fell unconscious, Leonarda killed her, dismembered the body, and processed it in the same gruesome manner. Once again, the remains were turned into soap, and Francesca's blood became a key ingredient in Leonarda's now famous cookies, which she generously distributed among neighbors and guests. Francesca's disappearance also failed to raise suspicion. Her acquaintances knew she had found a promising job opportunity and simply assumed she had left in a hurry. The only odd detail was that she had entrusted Leonarda with her savings, but no one questioned it. 2 months later, on November 30th, 1940, believing that her sinister sacrifices were truly ensuring her son's safety, Leonarda prepared to carry out her plan for the third time. This time, she selected 59-year-old Virginia Cacioppo as her next victim. According to Leonarda's tarot readings, Virginia's fate was on the verge of a drastic change. Leonarda told her that a theater manager in Florence was in need of a secretary who was familiar with the world of opera, and she assured Virginia that he was eager to offer her the position. As with the previous victims, Leonarda instructed her not to tell anyone about the opportunity. However, Virginia was too excited to keep such wonderful news to herself, and she eagerly shared her plans with her closest friends. But Virginia had no idea that she was walking straight into a trap. At noon on November 30th, Leonarda opened the door of her home to Virginia. Little did she know that, at that very moment, Virginia's daughter-in-law was watching as she entered the house but never came out again. Everything was carried out just as before. The only difference was that Leonarda had now perfected her method. This time, she not only threw the dismembered body into the boiling cauldron, but also added a bottle of cologne. The scent that emanated from the brew was exquisite. After a few hours, Leonarda managed to produce excellent soap with a creamy texture. She then resumed making her desserts, which were so popular and delicious that those who tasted them called them a masterpiece. Leonarda, in turn, insisted that it was simply her signature recipe. A few days later, Leonarda began distributing pieces of soap to her neighbors and treating them to her famous cookies. She took pride in the recognition she received from the townspeople, who saw her as a kind and helpful woman. Meanwhile, Virginia's daughter-in-law, Albertina Fonte, grew increasingly worried about her sudden disappearance. There wasn't even an address where she could be found, which Albertina found odd, as Virginia had never behaved this way before. She decided to formally report Virginia's disappearance to the chief of police in Correggio. During questioning, Albertina mentioned that the last time she had seen Virginia, she had entered Leonarda Cianciulli's house. Further investigations revealed that 2 of Leonarda's other friends had also vanished without a trace. As the search continued, disturbing details emerged about a crime that was not only shocking, but sent waves of collective horror throughout the town. Nearly everyone had, at some point, eaten Leonarda's cookies and bathed with her soap, both of which contained the remains of her victims. When the police searched Leonarda's home, they discovered the victim's jewelry and other belongings hidden beneath the brick flooring. They also found the dental prosthetics of the 3 women. In one of the rooms, officers uncovered 3 axes, several knives, and the cauldron in which the murderess had boiled the bodies to make soap. These tools and items are now displayed in the Criminological Museum of Rome. Realizing that her crimes had been exposed, Leonarda confessed, detailing her methods. She had lured her victims with promises of a bright future, either a dream job or a chance at love. Once the victims were convinced, they willingly left all their possessions in Leonarda's care. She would then serve them a glass of wine laced with sleeping pills. Once unconscious, Leonarda took an axe and killed them before proceeding to dismember their bodies in a large basin. She then boiled their remains to make soap and used their blood in her pastries. After the police raid, investigators contacted the 2 men Clementina and Virginia had planned to meet, initially suspecting a criminal network. However, after further investigation, the men were ruled out, as they had no knowledge of what had transpired. Leonarda's son, Giuseppe, was also arrested on suspicion of being an accomplice. The police refused to believe that she had acted alone. After spending 5 years in prison awaiting trial, Giuseppe was eventually released due to a lack of evidence. Leonarda tried to convince the jury that her son had no involvement in the crimes and that she alone was responsible. To exonerate him, she agreed to be dissected in the morgue to prove that she alone had committed the crimes. Incredibly, the autopsy took just 12 minutes. The trial began on June 12, 1946. During the proceedings, Leonarda attempted to justify her actions, claiming she was paying a blood debt to honor the memory of her deceased mother. She insisted that her mother appeared to her in dreams, threatening to take the lives of her children unless she offered innocent lives in return. At one point, a forensic expert stated that it was unlikely that Leonarda had been able to turn her victims into soap. In response, she stood up and declared, "If anyone in this courtroom provides me with a body, I will prove it without difficulty." A few days into the trial, Leonarda was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in the Pozzuoli Women's Psychiatric Facility, where she died of a stroke on October 15, 1970, at the age of 77. During and after her lifetime, numerous accounts were published about her case, the most famous being her memoir, Confessions of a Bitter Soul. She became infamously known as the Soap-Maker of Correggio. This case remains one of the most shocking in history. No one could have imagined that a woman regarded as a kind and caring neighbor could commit such gruesome acts. Even more horrifying was the fact that she had unknowingly involved the entire town, making them eat cookies and bathe with soap that contained the remains of her victims.